He followed his maid, suspecting betrayal, but what he discovered changed his life forever. David Marshall believed in one thing above all: control. Control over his business, his investments, his daily schedule. Everything in his life was a carefully managed equation, precise and predictable. That's how he built his fortune, turning a modest startup into a sprawling empire. But lately, something small, almost insignificant, had disrupted his perfect world. It started with missing items: a pack of pasta, a few cans, some fresh fruit, little things disappearing from his kitchen. At first, he thought it was a simple mistake. Maybe the chef miscounted, or perhaps the cleaning staff were being careless. But as the days passed, the pattern became clear. Food was vanishing, and David's instinct, the same instinct that had made him a billionaire, told him this wasn't just a coincidence. David didn't confront anyone. He didn't demand explanations. Instead, he observed. He watched the security footage, but there was nothing unusual. His staff carried on with their duties, polite and efficient. The kitchen was always pristine, the pantry neatly stocked. But still, the items continued to disappear. That's when he decided to take matters into his own hands. On a quiet Wednesday evening, David parked his sleek black Mercedes 2 blocks away from his mansion in Murrumbee Hills. Lights off, engine silent, he sat in the darkness, waiting. His eyes fixed on the gate, his pulse steady. He didn't have to wait long. A figure appeared: Maria Evans, his housekeeper of over 5 years. A woman who was always polite, always quiet, almost invisible. But tonight, she wasn't just a shadow in his home. She was carrying 2 heavy grocery bags, and with a steady pace, she walked down the street. David followed her. He stayed 3 steps behind, blending into the shadows. Maria didn't glance back, didn't hesitate. Her path was direct through the busy subway station, across 2 transfers, and finally to a modest apartment building with worn-out walls and faded paint. He watched as she climbed the stairs, pausing once to catch her breath. Her steps were slower now, her shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of the bags. David felt a strange tension in his chest, but he shook it off, focusing on the door where she disappeared. From the hallway, he heard her voice, soft, gentle. And then a weaker voice responded, a boy's voice. "Mom, did you get the medicine?" "I did, sweetheart. We'll share the pills again this week, don't worry." David's jaw tightened. Share the pills? He leaned closer, his heart pounding against his ribs. Share the pills. The missing food, the vanishing medicine. It wasn't theft. It was survival. He turned and left before they noticed him, but his mind was racing. In all his years of managing fortunes, of controlling every detail of his life, he had never once seen Maria, truly seen her. She was always there, like the marble floors she polished, necessary, useful, invisible. But now, he couldn't unsee her, couldn't unhear the quiet strength in her voice, couldn't forget the tired slouch of her shoulders or the boy's fragile, hopeful tone. The next morning, David sat at his marble-topped kitchen island, staring at his coffee. The steam curled upward, twisting like a question mark. Maria moved around the kitchen as she always did, silent, efficient, almost a shadow. But now, he saw her hands tremble slightly as she poured the juice, saw the faint lines of exhaustion under her eyes, saw the quiet weight she carried with every step. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall," she greeted him politely, her voice steady but lacking the usual energy. "Morning, Maria." His voice was calm, but his mind was a storm. He wanted to ask her about the boy, about the pills, about why she had never once mentioned her struggles. But how do you break years of silence with a single question? Instead, he watched. He listened. He remembered. Every day she arrived on time. Every day she did her work. No complaints, no absences. She never asked for a raise, never asked for help. He knew nothing of her life, and yet, She knew everything about his. She cleaned his photos, polished his awards, arranged his suits. She knew his favorite wine, what time he liked to shower, the book he never finished. And he had never once asked about her world. That night, David found himself back at the modest apartment building. Not to spy, not out of suspicion, but something else, something he wasn't ready to name. He stood again in the hallway, listening. The boy's voice was faint, but clear. "Mom, I'm scared. What if the pills aren't enough this time?" "We'll figure it out. We always do." Maria's voice cracked slightly, a soft tremor that spoke of quiet courage. David's chest tightened again. He turned and walked away, his thoughts a tangled mess. He returned to his mansion, surrounded by luxury, but the rooms felt emptier, the marble floors colder. For the first time in a long while, David Marshall didn't feel in control, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be. The next morning, David Marshall sat at his marble-topped kitchen island, staring at his coffee. The steam curled upward, twisting like a question mark. Maria moved around the kitchen as she always did, silent, efficient, almost invisible. But now, he saw her differently. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured the juice, the careful way she avoided his gaze. For 5 years, she had been a constant presence, a quiet force in the background of his world. But until last night, she had been invisible. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall," Maria greeted, her voice calm but lacking warmth. "Morning, Maria," he replied, trying to keep his voice even. But his mind raced with questions. About the boy, about the medicine, about the life she lived beyond his pristine mansion. He wanted to ask, but how do you break years of polite silence with a single question? Instead, he watched. He listened. He remembered. Maria was never late, she never complained, never missed a day of work. She knew his preferences better than he knew them himself. She was the one who noticed when his favorite wine ran out, who ensured his suits were perfectly pressed, who remembered the book he left half-read on the nightstand. But he knew nothing about her. Days turned into a week, and David found himself unable to focus. His business meetings felt hollow. The discussions about stock prices and expansion plans seemed distant. His world of control and precision felt suddenly small. And so, one quiet Saturday morning, David found himself standing outside that same worn apartment building again. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know what he hoped to see. But something drew him back. From the hallway, he heard her voice again, reading softly. He leaned closer and saw her sitting on the floor with a small group of children, their wide eyes fixed on her. She held an old, faded storybook, her voice clear and warm. The children listened intently, some leaning forward, some resting their heads on her shoulder. And in that moment, Maria was someone else entirely, not a housekeeper, but a storyteller, a guide, a light. David leaned against the wall, watching in awe. He recognized a few of the children, some from the neighborhood, some who looked too thin, too tired. This wasn't just a reading group. It was a sanctuary. He felt something shift inside him, not pity, not shame, but admiration, a raw, honest admiration. As the children laughed and chatted around Maria, David turned to leave, but then he heard a familiar voice, a boy's voice. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Maria's voice softened. "We always figure it out, Daniel." "We always do." Daniel, the boy from the apartment, her son. David walked away, his chest tight. Not from guilt, but from something else, something he wasn't ready to name. Back in his mansion, surrounded by polished marble and shimmering chandeliers, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was empty. And for the first time in a long while, David Marshall didn't feel in control. And part of him didn't want to be. David Marshall couldn't shake the image of Maria sitting on that worn floor, surrounded by children, her voice gentle but strong, reading stories with a warmth he had never seen in her at his mansion. She was alive there, vibrant, a completely different person. He tried to focus on his work, tried to bury himself in quarterly reports, in investment meetings, in endless emails. But his thoughts kept drifting back. He saw her hands, steady as she turned the pages, heard her voice, clear and kind, saw the light in the children's eyes. And so, one rainy evening, David did something he hadn't done in years. He cleared his schedule. He told his assistant to cancel his evening calls, ignored the emails piling up on his phone, and instead, he drove to the modest neighborhood where Maria lived. This time, he didn't hide. He stood outside the community center, rain dripping from his coat, watching through the foggy window as Maria read to the children. When the session ended, the kids hugged her, laughed, and ran off into the night. David stepped forward, pushing the door open. Maria looked up, surprised. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Mr. Marshall?" "David. Please, call me David," he corrected, stepping inside, shaking off the rain. Her eyes studied him, cautious. "What are you doing here? I wanted to understand." "I followed you. I saw the children. I didn't know you did this." Maria's face softened, but she remained guarded. "They need a place to feel seen, to feel heard, a place where someone listens." David looked around the small, cramped room, the faded posters on the walls, the broken chairs, the old books with tattered covers. "And you give them that." "I try," Maria replied quietly, turning to straighten the chairs, her back to him. "Maria, I never really saw you." "Not until now," David admitted, his voice lower, almost unsure. "You weren't supposed to," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Your world and mine, they're not supposed to touch." "Maybe they should." Maria turned, arms crossed, a mix of curiosity and frustration in her eyes. "Why are you here, Mr. Marshall? Pity." "Guilt? You want to feel good about yourself by playing savior?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than David intended. "No. I don't know, but I'm trying to understand." Maria's expression softened slightly. Understanding is a good start. Silence hung between them, thick but not hostile. Just heavy. "Can I help?" David asked, almost surprising himself. "With the children?" Maria asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Yes, if you'll let me." She stared at him for a moment, searching his face for something sincerity, perhaps. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. We have another session next Saturday. If you show up, we'll see." David smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "I'll be here." The drive home felt different. The city lights seemed softer, the rain a gentle whisper on his windshield. For the first time in years, David felt lighter. But as the week went by, he began to question himself. Would she really let him help? Was he just being naive, pretending to care? But he pushed those thoughts aside. When Saturday came, David arrived early. The children looked at him with wide eyes, curious and a little unsure. Maria introduced him as Mr. David, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the desire to belong. They read together, laughed together, and for 2 hours David wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a man with an empire. He was just a voice, a smile, a listener. And when the session ended, a small boy tugged his sleeve. "Will you come next time?" David knelt down, smiling. "If Maria lets me." Maria's eyes met his. "We'll see." And in that moment, David knew he would be back. Saturday became a ritual. Each week, David Marshall found himself arriving at the small community center, stepping through the rusted gate and watching as Maria read to the children. But he no longer just watched, he participated. At first, He simply listened, letting the stories carry him to places he hadn't imagined in years. But soon, Maria handed him a book. "Would you like to read today?" she asked, her smile soft, almost teasing. David hesitated, then nodded. He began reading, his voice a little stiff at first, but soon he found a rhythm. The children listened, some leaning against his knees, others peeking over his shoulder, and when he finished, they clapped. Not because he was great, but because he was there. As weeks turned to months, David's presence became a familiar sight. The children called him Mr. David, their shy smiles turning to warm grins as he walked in. He brought new books, ones he had chosen carefully, adventure stories, fairy tales, even books about science and history. He began to see the world through their eyes, simple, curious, hopeful. But it wasn't just the children who changed. Maria seemed lighter, her laughter coming more easily. The tired lines around her eyes softened, and though she was still cautious around David, there was a quiet trust building between them. One rainy afternoon, as the children packed up their things, Maria and David stayed behind, stacking the old chairs. Rain tapped against the metal roof, filling the room with a gentle, rhythmic melody. "Thank you for helping, David. I never thought you would, well, that you would care about something like this." Maria's voice was soft, but sincere. "I never thought I would either," David admitted, leaning against the faded wall. "But this place, these kids, they mean something. You mean something." Maria's gaze dropped, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "They deserve to be seen, to be heard." "And so do you," David whispered, his voice barely above the rain's gentle patter. Silence filled the room, not awkward, but warm. For the first time, they weren't employer and employee. They were just two people, connected by something real. But as their connection grew, so did David's curiosity. He learned about the struggles Maria faced, the medical bills for Daniel, the constant fear of his condition worsening, the nights she stayed up reading to him, comforting him. And he learned about Daniel himself, a bright, curious boy with a love for space, for stars, for stories of astronauts and galaxies. But also a boy who struggled with his health, whose dreams seemed far away. David found himself wanting to do more. Not out of guilt, but out of a desire to be part of this world he had once ignored. One Saturday, as the children laughed and played, David pulled Maria aside. "I know about Daniel's condition. I know you've been struggling." Maria's face tightened. "David, please, I never asked for—" I know you didn't. "But I'm asking you to let me help." Her eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. "We're not charity cases. I don't want your pity." "It's not pity, Maria. It's respect. You've done so much with so little. I want to help because I see you." "Because I admire you." Silence hung between them, heavy and tense. Maria's gaze fell, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her worn purse. "Let me help Daniel," David whispered. "Let me at least make sure he gets the best care." Tears glistened in Maria's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I don't know. Just think about it." That night, as David returned to his mansion, the vast, empty halls seemed colder than ever. He sat in his grand study, surrounded by leather-bound books and priceless art, but all he could think about was Daniel's wide eyes, Maria's quiet courage. He didn't sleep well. A week passed, and Maria said nothing. She continued to read to the children, her smile warm, but her eyes guarded. David didn't push her. He simply showed up, brought new books, and read with the children. But one evening, as they packed up, Maria turned to him. If you really want to help, we have an appointment next Wednesday. With Daniel's doctor. You could come." David's heart raced. "I'd be honored." And for the first time, Maria's smile was real, unguarded, a glimpse of the woman she had hidden behind duty and fear.
David left the center that night feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The waiting room at the clinic was quiet, the air filled with the sterile smell of antiseptic. David sat beside Maria, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on the door across the hallway. For a man who had once commanded entire boardrooms, he had never felt so powerless. Maria sat silently beside him, her shoulders tense, her hands resting on her lap, fingers interlocked. She hadn't said much since they arrived. Only a quiet thank you when he met her outside the community center. But David could see the fear in her eyes, the quiet dread she tried to hide behind a polite smile. Finally, the door opened, and a nurse called them inside. Dr. Harrison Carter greeted them with a warm but serious expression. Maria, David, thank you for coming. I've reviewed Daniel's latest test results. Maria's grip tightened on her purse, her knuckles pale. Is it getting worse? Dr. Carter sighed, taking a seat across from them. Daniel's condition is progressing. His current treatment is no longer effective. We need to consider more aggressive options, a surgery, but it's expensive, and there are risks. David leaned forward. What are the chances of success? With a skilled team, the success rate is decent, but without it. Dr. Carter didn't need to finish. Maria's face fell, her shoulders slumping. I can't afford that. Yes, you can, David interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I'll cover the costs. Maria's head snapped towards him, her eyes wide with shock. David, no. I can't. I won't let you. This isn't charity, Maria. This is me helping a friend. This is me making sure a bright young boy has a future. Tears filled Maria's eyes, but she shook her head. I don't want to owe you. You don't owe me anything, David whispered, his voice gentle. Please, let me do this. Dr. Carter watched quietly, giving them a moment. Finally, Maria nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. David arranged everything with Dr. Carter, ensuring that Daniel would have the best surgeons, the best care. And as they left the clinic, Maria walked beside him, her steps slow, her gaze distant. I don't understand you, David, she whispered. Why? Why do you care so much? Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, he admitted. Not for a boardroom, not for a bottom line, but for someone who deserves a chance. They walked in silence, the city's noise a distant hum around them. Days turned into nights filled with anxiety. David called the clinic for updates, texted Maria to check on her, and even visited the community center, though his heart wasn't in it without her and the children. And then the surgery day arrived. David was there, waiting with Maria in the sterile hallway, watching as nurses wheeled Daniel into the operating room. The boy looked so small, so fragile under the pale hospital sheets, but his eyes were bright, a shy smile on his lips as he waved. Uncle David, will you tell me a story later? David's throat tightened. As many as you want, Daniel. I promise. When the doors closed, Maria buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. David placed a gentle hand on her back. He's strong, Maria, just like his mother. I'm so scared, she whispered, her voice muffled. I am too, David admitted. And for the first time, he realized it was true. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Maria paced the hallway, her hands never leaving her phone. David sat quietly, his mind racing with thoughts not of his business, not of his wealth, but of a boy who dreamed of space, of a woman who had taught him to care. Finally, Dr. Carter stepped out, his expression tired but relieved. The surgery went well. Daniel is stable. We'll keep him in recovery for a few days, but the prognosis is good. Maria's knees buckled, and David caught her, his arms wrapping around her in a tight embrace. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time
They were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, clinging to him. "Thank you so much." David didn't reply.
He just held her, letting her cry, feeling something warm and powerful bloom in his chest. That night, back at his mansion, David stood in his grand study, surrounded by awards, photographs, luxury, but all of it felt distant, small. And then he looked at his phone, a message from Maria. "Daniel is awake. He asked if you would visit tomorrow." David smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "I'll be there." David Marshall visited the hospital every day. At first, he thought it was just to check on Daniel, to see if the surgery had truly been successful. But as the days passed, he realized it was more than that. It wasn't just about Daniel, it was about being there. Being present. He would bring books, colorful picture books that made Daniel smile. He would sit by the bedside, reading stories of astronauts, of brave adventurers crossing galaxies, and Daniel, pale but smiling, would listen intently, his fingers tracing the images, his eyes wide with wonder. Maria was always there, her quiet strength, a constant presence. She would sit beside her son, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort. At night, when Daniel slept, David and Maria would sit by the window of the hospital room, the city lights stretching out below them. One evening, as the soft hum of hospital machines filled the room, Maria leaned her head against the cold glass. "You don't have to be here every day, David. You have a life, a world far from this." David smiled gently. "Maybe this is where I want to be." Maria turned, her eyes searching his face. "Why?" "Because I've spent years thinking I was helping people. Building a business, creating jobs, giving to charities. But none of it felt like this." "Like what?" "Like it matters." Silence settled between them, warm, peaceful. Daniel grew stronger. His color returned. His laughter filled the room again. He would ask David about space, about stars, about life on other planets. And David would tell him stories, some true, some wild with imagination. "You know, Uncle David," Daniel whispered one night, "when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut, or maybe a doctor, so I can help kids like me." David's heart swelled. "I think you'd be amazing at either, Daniel." But not everything was perfect. Back at his mansion, David's absence didn't go unnoticed. His assistant called, emails piled up, and his niece Victoria grew concerned. "Uncle David, where have you been? The board is worried. You're missing meetings." "Investors are asking questions." "I'm handling something important, Victoria. More important than the company?" "Yes." Victoria was stunned, her voice sharp. "Are you losing your mind? We built this empire together." "You built an empire, Victoria." "But I think I've been missing something." Victoria's voice turned cold. "Don't throw everything away for some project, for some charity case. His name is Daniel, and he's not a project. He's a boy who deserves a chance." "So this is about some kid," she scoffed. "It's about more than that. It's about living. It's about finding something real." Victoria was silent for a long moment. "Fine, but don't expect the world to understand." David sighed. "Maybe I don't want the world to understand." But the world did begin to notice. Stories spread about the billionaire seen at a small community center, about the wealthy man who spent his days reading to children. Some whispered that he was going through a crisis. Others thought it was a publicity stunt. David ignored them all. Instead, he focused on the one thing that mattered showing up. For Daniel. For Maria. For the children who now greeted him with smiles and stories of their own. On a sunny Saturday, Maria surprised David with a small gift, a simple leather-bound journal. "You're always telling stories. Maybe it's time you write some of your own." David's fingers traced the cover, a soft smile on his lips. "Thank you, Maria." You've done so much for us. For Daniel.
I don't know how to thank you. You already have, David whispered, his voice filled with quiet emotion. As the weeks turned into months, David's life transformed. The grand mansion he once called home felt cold and empty without the laughter of children, without the quiet comfort of Maria's presence. And so, one evening, as he stood by his office window, watching the city lights below, David made a decision. He would make that world his world, not just as a visitor, but as part of it. That night, he wrote a letter, a resignation from the board of his company, naming Victoria as his successor. He wasn't running away. He was walking towards something real. And in his heart, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. David's decision to step away from his company didn't happen quietly. News spread quickly. The billionaire who had walked away from his empire, leaving it in the hands of his niece, Victoria Marshall. Some called it a midlife crisis. Others speculated that he had been forced out, but David didn't care. For the first time in years, he wasn't living for the opinions of shareholders or the expectations of board members. He was living for something real. He spent his mornings at the community center, helping Maria with the children, reading stories, organizing art activities, even helping fix the old peeling walls. The children now called him Uncle David, and he smiled each time he heard it. But not everyone understood. Victoria confronted him one evening. "Uncle David, what are you doing? People are talking. Investors are nervous. Our stock is dipping. Are you just going to let everything we built crumble?" David looked at her calmly. "We didn't build anything, Victoria. I did. And now I'm building something else." "Something else? With who? A maid? A sick child?" "Her name is Maria. His name is Daniel, and they're more real than any of the numbers on your spreadsheets." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "You're throwing away your legacy. You're becoming a joke." "No, I'm becoming human." "Fine. But don't expect me to pick up the pieces when this falls apart. Victoria, I hope you build something you can be proud of, but I won't be part of a life that's just numbers and titles anymore." She stormed out, and for a moment David felt a pang of sadness. But it passed, replaced by a quiet peace. Back at the community center, his world was simpler but richer. He laughed with the children, helped them with their homework, listened to their stories. He saw the way Maria's eyes brightened when she saw him, the way Daniel beamed when he walked in the door. One rainy afternoon, as they cleaned up the art supplies, Maria approached him. "David, are you sure about this? Leaving your company? Your life?" "I'm not leaving my life, Maria. I'm finding it." Her smile was soft, but her eyes were filled with something else, a quiet, unspoken gratitude. But not everything was perfect. The community center needed repairs. The walls were cracking, the windows leaked when it rained, the shelves were filled with old, torn books, and the children deserved more. David approached Maria with an idea. "What if we expand this place? Make it a real learning center, books, computers, a proper playground?" "David, that takes money." "A lot of it. I know, and I have it, and I want to use it for something that matters." Maria hesitated. "I don't want this to become another project. I don't want these kids to feel like they're part of some charity. It won't be. It will be a place they can be proud of. A place you built." "We built." David's smile widened. "We built." Within weeks, renovations began. New walls, fresh paint, bright murals painted by the children. David hired teachers, bought new books, and even arranged for a small kitchen to provide healthy snacks. The community center transformed into a vibrant, colorful haven. But as the center flourished, Victoria's warnings began to come true. Rumors spread, whispers of David wasting his fortune, of him being manipulated, of him losing his mind. But David didn't care. Not when he saw the joy on the children's faces,
Not when he watched Daniel run across the new playground, his laughter filling the air. One evening, as the sun set over the bustling city, David and Maria stood by the new playground, watching the children play. "You changed their lives," Maria whispered. "No, Maria, you did. I just had the privilege of helping." She looked at him, her smile warm and gentle. "You know, you're not the man I met all those years ago." "Good," David laughed. "That man was missing out." The grand opening of the new community center was a celebration like no other. Colorful banners waved in the breeze, children's laughter filled the air, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Families from all over the neighborhood gathered, their faces lit with joy and curiosity. David Marshall stood by the entrance, watching with a quiet smile. It wasn't a skyscraper, not a luxury resort or a grand estate, but this place, this humble center, meant more to him than any of his previous achievements. Maria stood beside him, her eyes shining as she watched the children run across the new playground, their shoes kicking up clouds of dust. The old, worn-out walls were gone, replaced by bright murals painted by the children themselves, stories of brave explorers, of magical forests, of starry skies. "Look at them," Maria whispered. "They're so happy." "Because of you," David replied. "No, because of us." The ceremony began with a short speech. Local leaders thanked David for his generosity, but he waved it off. "This isn't about me. It's about them," he said, gesturing to the children, to the parents, to the young teachers now working at the center. "It's about giving them a place where they can dream, learn, and be seen." The crowd applauded, but David's eyes found Maria. She smiled, a gentle, proud smile that made his heart swell. But as the celebration continued, a familiar face appeared at the edge of the crowd. Victoria. Her sharp, elegant suit and cool expression seemed out of place among the colorful chaos. "Uncle David!" she called out, making her way toward him. "Quite the show you've put on." "It's not a show, Victoria. It's a beginning." "A beginning? Or the end of everything you've built?" "Everything I built never mattered as much as this." Victoria sighed, crossing her arms. "You can't just walk away from your legacy." "I'm not walking away. I'm redefining it." "And you think helping a few kids is going to change the world?" she asked, her voice edged with bitterness. "It's already changed mine." Victoria stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. But for the first time, it's my choice." Victoria shook her head. "Fine. But when the world forgets you, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned and walked away, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement. David watched her go, a faint sadness in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by warmth as Daniel ran up to him, his face flushed with excitement. "Uncle David, come see the new library. It's got so many books." David smiled, letting the boy lead him inside. The walls were lined with shelves filled with bright, colorful books, stories of adventure, of science, of far-off places. The children's quiet haven had become a vibrant, living world of dreams. Maria joined them, her voice filled with pride. "They love it. They finally have a place that's theirs." "And so do we," David whispered. As the sun began to set, families gathered under the twinkling string lights, sharing food, laughing, telling stories. David stood beside Maria, his heart full. "I never imagined this," he whispered, "that something so small could mean so much. Sometimes, the smallest things are the ones that change everything." They stood together, watching the children play, feeling the quiet joy that filled the air. And for the first time in a long, long while, David Marshall knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The community center became more than just a building. It became a home, not just for the children who ran laughing through its halls, but for David and Maria as well. David had never imagined that a place so simple could feel so full. He became Uncle David
to more than just Daniel. The children flocked to him with stories, with questions, with bright, eager eyes. He listened, he laughed, he learned. Maria watched him, a quiet smile on her face, seeing a man who had once been lost in a world of power and control now find joy in something as simple as a child's drawing. But as the center flourished, so did whispers. David's old world wasn't ready to let go of him. Business magazines ran stories of the fallen titan. Former colleagues whispered about his mental state. Victoria's calls became more frequent, her voice edged with frustration. "Uncle David, the board is questioning your decision. They're worried about your legacy. They're saying you've lost your mind." David's voice was calm. "I haven't lost my mind, Victoria. I've just found my heart. You're being reckless. You're throwing everything away for nothing." "It's not nothing. It's more than I ever had." Victoria's silence was sharp, her disappointment clear, but David didn't let it shake him. He had finally learned the difference between being important and being present. One crisp autumn morning, David arrived at the center with a stack of new books. He was greeted by a rush of children's laughter. Daniel ran to him, his cheeks flushed. "Uncle David, look, I drew a rocket ship." David knelt down, examining the bright, colorful drawing. "It's amazing, Daniel." "Is this you flying to the stars?" Daniel grinned. "Yeah, and you're coming with me." David's heart warmed. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." But as the days grew shorter, so did the patience of those who had once surrounded David. Victoria arrived at the center one evening, her face tense. "This has to stop, Uncle David. You're becoming a joke." "The company's reputation is suffering," David sighed. "The company will survive. It has you. It's not just about survival. It's about legacy. Your name means something. Not to me, not anymore." "Legacy is what you leave behind in people, not in buildings." Victoria's expression softened just slightly. "You really believe this is where you belong?" "Yes, more than anywhere I've ever been." She shook her head, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "I hope you're right." And with that, she left, leaving David standing in the quiet, empty hallway of the center. That evening, as David helped Maria clean up, he noticed her silence. "Are you okay?" he asked. She paused, her hands resting on the countertop. "Victoria's not wrong. You gave up everything." "I didn't give up anything, Maria. I found something real. I found you. I found Daniel. I found myself." Her eyes softened. I don't want you to regret this." "I won't. Not as long as I'm here." The days continued, filled with laughter, with stories, with quiet moments of peace. But there was a tension growing in the air. The world David had left behind seemed determined to pull him back. And then one evening, as he locked the center, David found Victoria waiting by his car. "They've called an emergency board meeting. They want to remove you as chairman, officially." David's face remained calm. "Let them." "Uncle David, please, don't you care? I care about the people I can help, not the titles I can hold." Victoria's voice cracked. "You were my hero. I looked up to you. I hope you still can, because everything I'm doing now, it's for you too. To show you there's more to life than power." Victoria's tears shimmered in the soft glow of the streetlight, but she said nothing more, turning and walking away. David stood in the cool night air, his heart heavy but clear. He knew his path. He had chosen it. Winter arrived quietly, a soft blanket of snow covering the rooftops, the chilly breeze carrying the scent of pine and distant laughter. The community center stood warm and bright, a beacon in the grey streets. Inside, the children were huddled together, decorating a tall Christmas tree, its branches filled with handmade ornaments and twinkling lights. David Marshall watched from the doorway, a soft smile on his lips, his heart. Maria was by the tree, laughing with the children, helping them string up the lights. Daniel, his cheeks flushed, stood on a small stool, carefully placing a star at the top of the tree. "Careful, buddy," David called, a gentle warmth in his voice. "I got it, Uncle David." Daniel grinned, and the children cheered when the star finally settled, its golden glow casting a soft light over the room. As the evening grew darker, families arrived, bringing warm dishes, sharing stories, and exchanging laughter. The center was alive, filled with warmth, love, and joy. David wandered through the room, listening, laughing, his heart full. But then, near the door, he saw a familiar face, Victoria. She stood, quietly, watching, her arms crossed, but her expression softer than before. "Victoria," David greeted, his voice gentle. "Uncle David." Her voice wasn't sharp, but hesitant. I wanted to see it for myself." "You're always welcome here." Victoria's gaze moved around the room. "They look so happy, and you look different." "I am. I thought you were losing everything, but maybe you were just finding it." David's smile softened. "Sometimes you have to lose something to see what truly matters." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him in a gentle hug. "I missed you. I missed you too." The evening continued with music, with laughter, with stories shared around a crackling fireplace. David stood by Maria, watching the children dance, their faces lit with joy. "Thank you, David," Maria whispered, her voice filled with quiet emotion. "For what?" "For being here. For staying. For being more than just a helper. For being family." David's hand found hers, warm and steady. "You gave me something I never knew I needed. A place to belong." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and silent. But inside, the world was alive with light and love. As the night came to a close, the children began to leave, parents bundling them up in warm coats, laughter echoing down the snowy streets. Daniel gave David a tight hug. "Merry Christmas, Uncle David." "Merry Christmas, Daniel." David walked Maria and Daniel to their small apartment, the snow crunching beneath their feet. They stood by the door, the cold air swirling around them. "Will you come in?" Maria asked, her voice soft. David smiled. "If you'll have me." Inside, the small living room was warm, a tiny tree decorated with simple ornaments glowing softly. They sat together, sipping cocoa, sharing stories, their laughter filling the cozy space. David looked around, at the faded wallpaper, the old couch, the flickering lights. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect. But it was home. And for the first time in his life, David Marshall knew he wasn't just visiting. He belonged. This story of David Marshall and Maria Evans is a heartfelt reminder that true wealth is not measured by money or status, but by the connections we build and the lives we touch. David, a powerful billionaire who once controlled everything in his life, discovered that his greatest fortune was not in his vast empire, but in the simple joy of being present for someone else. By stepping away from his world of luxury and choosing to be part of a humble community, David found purpose, love, and a sense of belonging he never knew he needed. For older audiences, this story is a testament to the idea that it is never too late to change, to care, or to find meaning. It shows that sometimes true happiness comes not from what we achieve, but from who we choose to stand beside. As we grow older, it is not our titles or possessions that define us, but the kindness we show, the people we help, and the memories we create. In the end, it is the lives we touch that become our lasting legacy.